thank you all for joining us for this panel discussion on the UK's role in peacekeeping. The integrated review from earlier this year casts Britain as a problem-solving and burden-sharing nation with a global perspective. Throughout the review, the rhetoric, is reflective of the goals of peacekeeping. In fact, the UK has recently reinstated its commitment to peacekeeping through a deployment of 300 UK troops to Mali at the end of last year, providing a highly specialised long-range reconnaissance group to the multidimensional integrated stabilisation mission in Mali, otherwise known as MINUSMA. We know how important the stabilisation is in Mali, considering ongoing events, including a coup as recent as this week. The goal of this panel is to review what the UK is already doing in the peacekeeping arena, but also to consider how we, and indeed other such states with the capacity to do so, might step up to effectively contribute more to peacekeeping operations. I'm delighted to be joined by three esteemed speakers to explore this. First to speak will be Harriet Mathews, Deputy Political Director at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Harriet joined the FCDO in '97 and has since held a number of high-level positions, including the Head of East and West Africa Department and the Director of Africa. She'll begin by outlining the UK's current involvement in peacekeeping, including any lessons we may have gained so far from our deployment in Mali, before sketching out what the future of peacekeeping might look like to the UK. We'll then hear from Werneck from the Strategic Force Generation and Capability Planning Cell at the United Nations. A former Brazilian Army colonel, he has completed 2 deployments to UN peacekeeping missions in Sudan and Haiti, in addition to being in the team to initiate planning efforts for peacekeeping missions in Central African Republic. We'll hear from him about the different types of contributions that states can offer to peacekeeping operations and what opportunities there are to fill any capability gaps. Finally, we're joined by Lieutenant Colonel Timothy O'Brien, Executive Officer of the Directorate of Operations and Plans at the Irish Defence Forces. Formerly a school commandant at the United Nations Training School Ireland, he was responsible for pre-deployment training and has served on peace support operations on 8 occasions in a variety of roles with both the UN and NATO. Tim will speak about the value of peacekeeping training and lessons from UNTSI, offering some suggestions as to how states might increase training as part of their contribution towards peacekeeping efforts. The remainder of the session will be a Q&A with you, our audience members. As outlined earlier, please use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen to write any questions, and a reminder that that part of the session will be off record. We'll be finishing promptly at 11:45, but I will endeavour to get through as many of the questions as possible. So without further ado, if we can hand over to you, Harriet.
Bryony, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you also to Lucy for convening today's conference, a really important one. In his speech to Parliament on the 19th of November last year, the Prime Minister said that he was proud of the UK's contribution to peacekeeping in Mali, and he indicated that increased defence spending would allow the UK to make an even greater contribution. And in the same month, the Foreign Secretary said that UK's contribution to peacekeeping amounted to the clearest illustration of the way strengthening our defence and security capabilities could, I quote, boost our standing in the world while also contributing to our development efforts, including our soft power abroad. And so from this and the IR quotes, which you've already heard, you can see that the commitment to peacekeeping feels real. We all know that UN peacekeeping is a complex endeavour, and I think we all understand that peacekeeping is in a constant state of reform to meet the evolving character of conflict and conflict drivers, and to respond to the shifting geopolitical trends within and beyond the Security Council. So the UK's broad approach to peacekeeping is underpinned by 3 reform priorities: higher quality pledges from contributing countries, and then enhanced mission planning and performance. So 3 Ps. Our contribution is informed by these priorities. And our intent is to use contingent and staff officer deployments, training and capacity building with partner troop contributing countries and cross-Whitehall funding and programming to drive the necessary reform. And so let me give you a tangible example. We support the development of intelligence doctrine and training in UN headquarters. We fund staff officers on Operation and MONUSCO responsible for applying that doctrine on mission. And now in MINUSMA, we have a contingent deployment which gathers intelligence and fires it back to Mission HQ. Our financial contribution to the peacekeeping budget is an incentive. Our assessed contributions to the peacekeeping budget totaled 340 million last financial year. And so we have a responsibility to ensure efficiency. But the absolute overarching motivation is about seeing a more effective and more capable peacekeeping interventions and interventions that work. So first, I want to spend a couple of moments on a current example of what we think is a smart and high quality pledge, the first of those Ps, and that's the UK deployment to MINUSMA. And then I'll move on to wider peacekeeping policy. So as Bryony said, in December 2020, the UK deployed 300 troops to Gao in Mali, contributing a new specialist long-range reconnaissance capability to MINUSMA's operations. This targeted and effectively fulfilled a capability gap identified by the UN. And doing that, really filling specific gaps, is exactly what we're encouraging other troop contributing countries to do in support of UN force generation planning reforms. This week, the first rotation of troops completes their deployment. And I think it's worth just taking a moment to outline some of their already visible impact on mission performance. And I should say that I hope that that impact would grow over time. So uniquely, our long-range reconnaissance group is able to operate 1 month at a time over 100 kilometres from its base camp in Gao. UK troops have reached over 70 Malian communities, providing a UN presence, deterring criminal activity, and recording the concerns of local communities, some of which have never previously interacted with MINUSMA peacekeepers. Information and intelligence gathered from these operations has been passed to Mission HQ, supporting intelligence-led planning. And that includes, for example, the recent seizure of arms and equipment from a suspected militant group. And by reporting and responding to reported threats against civilians and effectively integrating civilian experts within operations, the Long-Range Reconnaissance Group has enhanced mission performance in the delivery of its mandate to protect civilians, the core of its purpose. The UK contingent's direct impact has been commended by the MINUSMA Force Commander and other mission leadership in helping to realise the force adaptation plan, and to build community relations between the mission and civilian populations. Of course, we're not acting alone. We're part of an international peacekeeping force of over 60 nations under UN command. And UK personnel are engaged effectively with both mission and other troop contributing countries' personnel, demonstrating a real willingness to integrate and support greater coordination in support of peacekeeping reform. So again, let me give you something tangible. So an example is that the Long-Range Reconnaissance Group personnel have provided aid memoirs to the mission on safely operating drones. They've shared lessons with Bangladeshi peacekeepers and provided training on the rules of engagement to the Nigerians. We've also been able to collaborate with the UN on addressing wider concerns, especially the mission's casualty evacuation provision. And we've helped augment the safety and security of all peacekeepers deployed on the ground by doing that. So UK forces are innovating through the deployment and based on their experience. And one example of that is we've been able to test our own Blood Far Forward initiative. It's a defence aspiration to provide blood transfusion to bleeding casualties within 30 minutes. And that's important for our own forces, but it has a resonance and a relevance for future UN missions as well. We recognise that 300 UK troops alone won't bring stability to Mali, and that's, we've always recognised that. But I think through the deployment, we can show UK support to the UN in a challenging space, and we can contribute to the overall effort to support peace and security. Our impact on the ground underlines the utility of having highly trained, well-equipped troops and police deployed on peacekeeping operations, something the UK is championing in discussions in New York and supporting bilaterally with training, advice and technical assistance to other aspiring contributors across Africa. It also adds to our credibility in the Security Council's peacekeeping deliberations, informing and securing our objectives for all mission mandates. And in line with the government's vision to integrate diplomatic development and defence activity, the MINUSMA deployment benefits from a more coherent package of programming support that wrap around the deployment. So alongside that, we've actually adapted our conflict, security and stability programmes in Mali and the region to make sure that they are complementary. Beyond Mali, so I'll sort of expand out a little bit more now, the UK maintains commitments to the UN peacekeeping mission in Cyprus, both as the largest troop contributor and guarantor to the treaty, and to the UN Support Office in Somalia. And we have about 550 personnel as the total sort of UK peacekeeping contribution. And within that figure, we maintain 30 military staff officers and seconded officers in field missions, and the UN its HQ in New York. And those are driving strategic planning, integrated leadership, monitoring and evaluation of mission performance. So for example, in MONUSCO, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, in the DRC, UK staff officers lead force planning, coordinate, plan and execute intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance activities, and provide PSVI, preventing sexual violence, child protection and gender advice direct to the force commander. So specific targeted roles with specific capabilities required. And I should say that this month the UK is going to deploy its first senior police officer to a UK peacekeeping mission since 2016 to UNMIK in Kosovo. So I think it brings another dimension also to UK expertise in upholding the rule of law. The next bit I want to talk about is peacekeeping reform, which is really the thrust, I think, of what we're trying to focus on across everything we're doing. UK efforts to embed reform on the ground are backed up by our substantive commitment of extra budgetary funding delivered through a cross-Whitehall fund called the Conflict, Stability and Security Fund. And in the last financial year, our non-assessed contribution totalled nearly £3.5 million. So the UK was one of the top 3 donor countries. And over the last few years, the UK has shown leadership and made progress on UN force generation, mission planning and evaluation, the creation and use of intelligence in UN operations, and the protection of civilians. And as I've said sort of at the beginning, information from our deployments help us argue for further reform across all peacekeeping operations. We're a leading voice on thematic peacekeeping issues, using Security Council resolutions and negotiations and the Special Committee on Peacekeeping to secure progress across all pillars of the Secretary General's Action for Peacekeeping reform initiatives. And sort of some specific examples of those that I think are important to highlight, not comprehensive. First, domestic compliance with pre-deployment training on sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as lobbying much more broadly to secure adherence to the full implementation of the UN human rights due diligence policy across every mission. Second, promoting a data and evidence-based approach to decision making, and that includes through the development of policies on integrated planning, the rollout of comprehensive performance assessment system to measure indicators of mission progress, and the introduction of the integrated peacekeeping performance and accountability framework. A third area, the UK is pen holder, so literally the country that holds the pen and leads negotiations on the protection of civilians in the Security Council, which supports a better understanding of local conflicts, early warning systems, and improved tracking of incidents and response. And this week is the Protection of Civilians Week in the Security Council. So we've been playing a leading part, including through co-hosting an event on the integral role of unarmed approaches to protection of civilians in UN peacekeeping. The advice to the UN gathered from our deployments on enhanced deployments has helped enhance CASEVAC policy and medical standards in support of safety and security of peacekeepers. And we've also impressed for the inclusion of peacekeeping intelligence in pre-deployment training, including authoring the Peacekeeping Intelligence Handbook and role modelling its implementation, for example, through MINUSMA. And my final example would be the advocacy for gender advisors and gender focal points in missions and publication of the UK National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. And we'll also continue to fund Canada's ELSI initiative, which improves the participation of uniformed women peacekeepers in UN missions, with a further 1.2 million this year. So I'm coming to the end. There's one final point before I wrap up. I think it's really important to say that for peace to be sustainable, peace building has to start a long time before an operation has drawn down. And that means that we really need to strengthen integrated planning. And on that, by integration, I mean planning by both those that are doing the peacekeeping and those that are doing the peace building, which are different parts of the UN. And I think on top of that, we need to encourage national ownership so that you don't develop a culture of dependency. And in my 20+ years in the Foreign Office, including largely dealing with issues in Africa, I've really seen that sometimes it can be easier to have an international force providing protection and security than it is to develop your own and pay for it and deal with lots of the internal issues. But if you don't do that, you won't be able to secure the long-term peace. So sort of to conclude, I think the IR was very clear on us supporting global efforts, including through our work at and with the UN, and as a financial and military contributor to UN peacekeeping missions. And as you've already heard before I started speaking, this runs right through everything we do. So I'm not sure that the IR is a radical departure from what our approach has been. Our priorities in peacekeeping, planning, pledging and performance remain relevant, and they're going to continue to inform any future contribution that the UK should make. But I do think the IR sets out a strong future commitment, and the fact that we need to do this in a properly integrated way and to be ambitious and confident. And finally, I hope that what you've taken from what I've said is this overarching aim in everything we do is reform and improvement to make sure that missions are more effective in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harriet, for that comprehensive outline of the UK's current commitment to peacekeeping, and that was brilliant. So, Ivo, if I can hand over to you next.
Oh, thank you, Bryony. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it is very early here in New York, but I do thank Rosie for the opportunity for having me here today. As a good former military, I do need to share a screen with a PowerPoint presentation to guide my thoughts. Just please let me know if you're seeing it. Can you see it? Okay, thank you. So my main goal today here, I am very pleased to be here today. I thank Rosie, I thank Paul for inviting me to be here today. I hope that the ideas that I will share here are useful for all the participants. And also I'd like to say that they mainly reflect my own personal views and not necessarily what the organization thinks. But a lot of the things that I'm going to mention here may be also applicable to some like-minded countries that the UK has, because there's some issues that we see, or not issues, but points that we notice that as we interact more with the Western European TCCs. Just to make a link with what my predecessor said today, we see here from the cell three main areas, three main pillars where the UK is contributing: the political, the financial, and the military. I will try to be more detailed on the military contribution that we see opportunities for the UK, but we do understand that they come all together. We can't see these in isolation. They are part of a framework. They are part of an agenda that the country has, and they come in an integrated manner. But before we talk about what the UK could do, how do we see peacekeeping? How do we see peacekeeping going? As one of the most important tools for UN, for the United Nations in terms of peace and stability, peacekeeping is politically driven, right? And to do a global political analysis and see where we're going to be years from now is extremely difficult. As it was mentioned in the beginning, it already changed with the change of one administration from one member state last year to this year. So we can see this reflect. So from our perspective, when we're doing our planning and trying to establish mid to long-term requirements or understanding mid to long-term scenarios, it is extremely hard to do it because we are politically motivated and we are part of a political organization. But some things are clear to us. What we see today is an increase of internationalized interstate conflicts, where borders are very easily surpassed, where people walk, and not only physically, but today we can also say through the internet, through global communication. So ideas are spread, and we can control a lot of these things. Also, we see an increased amount of conflicts and less peace accords. And many of the times these peace agreements are signed, they're extremely fragile and not very comprehensive. And this has an impact, a direct impact in the operational environment where peacekeeping operations are established, how we need to implement our mandates, and the risks that our peacekeepers have when they're on the ground implementing the tasks given to us by the Security Council. But in general, we can say that peacekeeping operations will still require our basic capacities. Our basic capacities, what I say, is our infantry units, our units in charge of doing community outreach and providing physical protection to peacekeepers. These will not change in the near future. They'll still be extremely required. We will be trying to do more with less and without delays. And it's very important that this mobility it comes in all three levels of our military operations. I could even say from the political side, but I'll remain in my area of expertise. So, strategic, operational, and tactical mobility, sufficient level of interoperability, and the UN is working very hard in the last years to establish a common doctrine with member states and advertising this either through military and police military manuals that reflect how we see different types of units being organized, being generated, and what they should be doing, but also in other areas, thematic areas such as protection of civilians, how the UN sees member states supporting our efforts in protection of civilians. This will bring, even if you train apart, come together in an operation area together, you'll be able to operate along the same lines. And of course, we move towards a more high-tech environment where these systems extremely important for the ability of our peacekeepers to conduct its operations. Protection of civilians will remain our main tasks, although they will be implemented in different ways based on the environment where we are deployed and the needs of the populations. We need to operate in these different environments, especially in urban areas, as the world and the population becomes more urban every day. We do see an additional need for critical capabilities through stronger partnerships. Isolated actions from member states will be less present, but more integrated approach between member states and bilateral deals, or partnering with the regional organizations to conduct our activities. We do have to control the narrative. We need to be able to influence people, and strategic communication and social media support, they tend to become more important every day, not only at the political level, but also at a very tactical level, in order to gain the trust and to have the population on our side. I could say in a larger leap, cyber operations will be important. We have to use the technology. We have to use what is high-end capabilities in our support in order to be able to deliver our mandated tasks. And of course, we need to consider the environment while doing our operations in everything. We want to make sure that our footprint doesn't leave anything behind that is not good for the country we're operating, where we'll be received by host nations, and we have the responsibility to make sure that when we leave not just the same, but a better conditions to the member states than were before we arrived. So how do I see in these three same pillars, the political, the financial, and the military? How do I see, where do I see opportunities for the UK? From the political, as we know, as a member of the Security Council, as a very active participant in the C-34 Special Committee for Peacekeeping, as one of the co-chairs of the ministerial process, the UK has to continue pushing their peacekeeping agenda. It's very, very important that we have the support from a member state such as the UK, because that brings also relevancy to what we do, and we have this strong support. It's very important to have this political backbone to allow us to implement the actions that are necessary. The financial support, you do have some mandatory assessments, not only as a member of the UN, but also a member of the 5. But I see that special projects that are funded by extra budgetary funds, they are very critical today. They bring flexibility for a member state to choose the areas where they want to invest, and they can identify real needs that we have and quickly provide these funds for us to be able to change something or to implement a project in an area that's critical, but still hasn't received the regular peacekeeping budget support. So it's very important that the UK identify these areas of interest, partners with the UN to have these funds available for us, so we can implement this project. And on the military and police, of course, which is, I would say, my area, the most important contribution that I look for. We do need the UK to continue thinking about deploying high-tech military and police capabilities, the deployment of individual qualified military and police staff officers, and I would add here to increase its gender participation. The employment of women peacekeepers is fundamental for our operations, not only within our deployed uniformed units, but also as individuals. And this brings a wider range of operational capabilities and to the mission, to your own unit, and it provides the image to the countries that are not able to provide as many women peacekeepers. That goes with them when they go back home, and we are able to also introduce changes to our partners, other member states that are deployed alongside of us. In terms of the military capabilities, we are introducing high-end technologies to improve efficiency in the delivery of mandates, to protect personnel and facilities, and this will increase as it moves forwards. But the reality is that the use of these high-end capabilities of our peacekeepers and more sophisticated technological resources will only become a reality when they become available to most of our TPCCs, troop police contributing countries, and can be integrated in the UN-wide system technology platforms. Until then, we, the Secretariat, we rely on developed countries such as the UK to contribute these capabilities, and in parallel, support other member states with capacity building, to training and mentoring. So when we talk about what the UK could do, is what you have that is unique that other member states do not have available at this stage. And I can say intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance units, both aerial or ground units. We can have the UAS manned ISR units. We do have the UN relies heavily on its aerial mobility. So qualified helicopters, both armed and utility, that are also able to provide medical evacuation, casualty evacuation. These are capabilities that not all member states have, and I'm sure that UK has available to provide to us. I'm talking about also medical support, either through training or to the deployment of light mobile surgical modules, hospitals, but also in terms of units, ground units. We do see smaller units, infantry companies such as recce companies, long-range support units, quick reaction forces. So countries like the UK, they have the experience, they have employed these capabilities in other different operational environments, which maybe are sometimes closer to the environments where we operate today. So these are the capabilities that we're looking for. And it will be very grateful if the UK can expand its participation. As it was mentioned today, the UK currently contributes in different types of missions. Some very traditional and well-established missions where patrols are sometimes even conducted by bicycles, because it allows in Cyprus, to places in Mali where if you don't go without a mine-protected vehicle, you are exposing your life and the life of others. So these type of capabilities are really needed by the United Nations, and we are sure that countries like the United Kingdom, they do have it available, and it will be extremely helpful for us. But it's not only flowers, we see some challenges as well. And I'd like to highlight these based on my experience, and I do apologize if this doesn't meet the country's policies or understanding of what you're doing. But I see these as some challenges that we face. First one is the long-term engagement with other organizations and not the UN. And this brings some limited understanding of UN rules, regulation, and standards that needs to be adhered by all member states, especially to the military personnel. As the much you are away from the UN, the less you know. The UN has a very unique framework. It's not as deploying with NATO, the European Union. It is a very unique framework because it has to cater for 193 member states. And we have to request member states to adhere to all these standards, rules, and regulations. What does this bring? And I'm trying to use this picture here of the high jump athlete. This makes sure that when we set a bar, when we set the UN standards that are sometimes imposed by us, by member states, such as the Contingent on the Equipment Manual, which is a General Assembly document, sometimes these standards are at the right place for some member states. They are too high from other member states that will require capacity building, but they might be also too low for member states that are in a higher or advanced stage of development of employment of its military capability. So we have to come to a common ground, right? And these difference of standards, for example, I'll just give two examples, is the concept of special forces for the United Nations and what European Western TCCs like the UK understand as special forces. So sometimes you bring these capabilities to our missions, but they are in excess. A lot of these things are not going to be used because they are beyond what we need and what we ask for. At the same time, the medical capabilities, the standards that the UN has adopted by the member states that are supposed to be equal to all, for countries like the UK, they might be a little bit lower than what you actually have as part of your own doctrine, your own military operations. So finding this common ground is sometimes challenging because it involves changes, it involves readaptation to a new environment of work. And then just some more details. One is linking the political and military will capability with the UN timing for needs and requirements. And what I want to say is that the United Nations force generation is demand-driven and not supply-driven. We have the peacekeeping capability readiness system framework where we do an analysis of mid to long-term requirements. We have advertised that to member states every 3 months through our current and emerging informed capability requirement paper for UN. And we do expect member states to go and make these pledges in the system so we can work with member states to have them in different levels of readiness and preparedness for when the need comes from a mission, we're able to quickly deploy these qualified and already assessed assets to our field missions. The way that I see sometimes the approach from member states, especially European member states, they approach us and they tell us, we would like to deploy this capability in 2 years, that mission. And it's sometimes hard to make sure that we will have that demand 2 years from now, or even to create a gap for that unit to be deployed. So sometimes the change of mindsets, the way that you operate and how the UN conducts force generation is something that might be challenging for the UK. The other main thing is the adjusting the duration of the deployments to the UN timings. And one example is staff officers. The UK usually deploy very qualified staff officers to senior positions like planners, chief planning in the force headquarters. Most of these deployments are for 6 months, and the usual deployment for staff officers in the UN is 12 months. So sometimes this brings a lack of continuity to the deployment of to the work that the force headquarters is doing. Even though they come with the same mindset, they come with the same training, it's different personalities. And we know that every time we have a change, our bosses change, the work environment changes a little bit. So it would be very useful if you could adjust the 12 months rotation time. This would bring more stability, continuity to the work in the force headquarters, especially on those qualified posts and very specific posts that we request member states such as UK to provide staff officers. The other one is blending into to all TCCs and not just working with European or like-minded TCCs. It's very important to understand that our peacekeepers are qualified, doesn't matter where they're coming from. We are trying to assess them. We're trying to push for the performance agenda, making sure that they are working side by side at the same level as well-developed TCCs. So blending as a one unit or one mission, one force is extremely important for the morale, the cohesion of amended implementation. And then we have what we call caveats or operational limitations, right? And the more we move into environments that do have risk for peacekeepers, we find sometimes some member states that are a little bit risk averse, or either because the medical standards are not what they're looking for, or the command and control structure is not exactly what they were used to operate with. So understanding that we have the needs of a mission, or if you do have any, let's say, limitation in terms of your operation employment, please let us know that in advance so we can actually do our selection process. We can communicate that to the planners in our missions, and they can employ those units accordingly. But we do have to understand that sometimes we operate in very risk environments, and it's the nature of the military and the police activity. So the risk exists, we have to limit it, but we can't just be not willing to do something because it involves risks. So these were some challenges that we see not only for the UK, but also from other member states. We do find an extremely open range of opportunities for capabilities to be deployed, especially those that are very unique to these countries, to the UK, that are not available to the majority of our peacekeepers. So these gaps are there, they do exist, and the UK is able to provide them. We'll be very grateful, and we'll be very happy to work with you to make sure that we can deploy them for peacekeeping operations. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity here today, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivo. That was brilliant. That's a really comprehensive outline of the capabilities that UK and other states might be able to offer. So our last speaker, Tim, if you would like to take the stage.
So good morning, everyone from Dublin, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here. I thank the UN Association, UK and RUSI for the opportunity to honour International Peacekeeping Day and to discuss some of the important topics that are on the agenda for today. I hope to complement the comments of Paul, Harriet and Ivo over the next 8 or 9 minutes. And what I propose to do is, first of all, to have a look at our involvement in peacekeeping operations in the Irish Defence Forces, our approach to training, and then some suggestions that we'd make to other militaries based on our experience, including the UK military. So I suppose as an introduction, the Irish Defence Forces have been permanently deployed on UN peacekeeping operations since 1958. These deployments represent one of the government's signature foreign policies and contribute to our ambition to act as a global island, which can play a meaningful role on the international stage despite our size. And as I speak, we're deployed on 6 UN missions throughout the Middle East and Africa. The bulk of our peacekeepers, including 2 mechanized units, are deployed in Lebanon and Syria, where we've had a permanent presence in one form or another since 1958. From a training perspective, what we have learned over the past 63 years is that peacekeeping operations are complex, often dangerous, and tend to last for quite a long time, anything from a decade to sometimes several generations. The complexity of these operations mean that military contingents need to pay a lot more attention to peacekeeping training than what can be achieved during standard pre-deployment training. And as a result, over the years, we have mainstreamed peace support operations or peacekeeping block of instruction into the syllabi of all career courses in the Defence Forces for officers and for non-commissioned officers. And this means that the first time that our peacekeepers are introduced to complex cross-cutting issues such as human security, sexual exploitation and abuse, the protection of civilians, security sector reform, or indeed the gender perspective, is not in the busy weeks before they deploy in the mission area when they've got a lot of other things in their mind. In addition, we run specialist courses on some of these cross-cutting issues, and these are targeted at those officers and NCOs filling command and staff appointments in our contingents, and also those who are serving in those 12-month appointments that Ivo spoke about in sector and force headquarters. These courses generally last 1 or 2 weeks, and they are open to international students, including the British Army. So having learned all that, I suppose the mainstreaming of peace support operations into our training, which is primarily, like most militaries, including the UK, conventional in nature. In other words, the role of a Western military is to protect the state and to train for warfare. This conversion to PSO training began in 1993. And that was because in the aftermath of the Cold War, the nature of conflict we were experiencing on peace support operations was changing dramatically. From monitoring what had been during the 60s and 70s and 80s relatively stable interstate conflicts to what General Sir Rupert Smith would many years later refer to as war among the peoples. And this new operational environment required a completely different approach to peacekeeping and far better peacekeeping, better trained peacekeepers. So as a result, our general staff decided to establish a new school in our military college to focus exclusively on peacekeeping operations. That school, the United Nations Training School Ireland, which I had the honour of commanding for a 2-year period, was initially staffed with some of our most experienced peacekeeping officers. And what they started to do was bring in outside actors into the military college to train beside our soldiers. And those were the actors that are present in any peace support mission, foreign military, NGOs, UN staff, police, diplomats and journalists. And we found that this approach to training was far more effective than allow each of these individual actors to train in their own professional silos. And it's perhaps worth noting that the reason we stood up a standalone school in the military college, rather than directing the existing schools to enhance their instruction on peacekeeping, was that the General Staff recognised that there was the potential of cultural resistance to focus on peacekeeping at the expense of training for conventional warfare. And that's still a discussion that happens in most Western militaries. How much attention should we focus on peacekeeping rather than on the core role of all militaries? So I suppose moving on to the reason you had this conference today, the integrated review. And I think that the review outlines the British government's commitment to universal human rights, the rule of law, freedom of speech and faith, and equality. And these are all concepts that are often reflected in UN Security Council mandates for contemporary peacekeeping missions. The review also makes a renewed commitment to use the UK as a force for good in the world, and outlines, as Harriet mentioned, a determination to seek multilateral solutions to major issues. So I would suggest that that level of ambition allows for great scope for the British Army to assist partner and host nations in the soft skills required by peacekeepers. So what specific role can any military, including the military, prepare in training for peace support operations? And I'd like to focus on three areas that can improve the performance of your own personnel and also assist the SRSG in achieving his or her mandated objectives. So I suppose the first and perhaps most obvious is to enhance the training of your own peacekeepers. And this would include having realistic pre-deployment training that takes into account the lessons from previous contingents that have returned, and having officers and NCOs who have just returned acting as mentors for those who are about to deploy. And I would also emphasize again the importance of mainstreaming instruction into the career courses in other militaries, including the British Army. And the amount of time dedicated to that peacekeeping training should be reflective of the importance you place in these operations. In particular, students attending such training, and this to go back to a point that Ivo made, need to understand how the UN, which is a civilian organization, differs dramatically from NATO or from the coalitions that you're used to dealing with since 9/11. Those were all military in nature. So for instance, the entire senior leadership of a mission are civilians, and the logistics and administration components are civilian led and generally civilian staffed. This does not mean that they're any better or any worse than their NATO equivalents, but they are different. And it is better to understand this before you deploy to the mission area, or it'll come as quite a shock to you if you're used to just dealing with NATO or indeed the EU. It's also important that you have sufficient personnel in each contingent qualified in areas such as the protection of civilians and have an understanding of the importance of human rights and of having a gender perspective. And there are multiple tools that can assist with this. As one example that we use, the European Security and Defence College have developed a serious game aimed at young soldiers who are used to using iPhones and iPads. And this Gaming for Peace program allows them to use serious game technologies to work on soft skills such as cultural awareness, communications in a mission area, and the gender perspective. And finally, we'd recommend that all militaries involved would have their PSO instructors deploy to other schools to pick up experience which would be useful. The second area any military, including the British, who are experts in this area, could focus on is capacity building of host nation security forces. So this is an area which the British have huge experience in, but it is worth pointing out that most UN missions will not be able to achieve their mandate until the host nation security forces, military and police, are trained to international standards. And Harriet made this point that sometimes it's easier to have an international force there rather than make the effort yourself. But if that's the case, you're going to be permanently deployed in Mali. You'll still be there in 10, 15 years' time. So, for instance, the reason there are no longer armed peacekeepers in what was once war-torn West Africa is because the international community supported the UN in strengthening the Ivorian and Liberian security forces and implemented insignificant security sector reform programs. There are numerous ways of achieving this aim, and in most UN missions, these include providing training for host nation personnel, conducting joint operations with those personnel to build up their confidence and to build up their legitimacy to their own host nation population, providing logistical support such as helicopters to facilitate host nation operations, or providing a medevac service for them, and then also simply mentoring individual members of the forces. I've personally witnessed the success of the British involvement in the creation of land border regiments for the Lebanese armed forces, and in the training of infantry personnel from the Malian armed forces when Ireland and the UK had a joint unit that worked as part of the EU training mission in that country. And I suppose the final area then for anyone to consider is to become subject matter experts in a thematic area. And again, Harriet dealt with this in detail. And I suppose following the UK's pledges at the 2017 UN Peacekeeping Defence Ministerial Conference in Vancouver, the British Army have become recognised experts in the field of human security. And I've no doubt that they will continue in the years to come to share this expertise with international students. And you could argue that PSO training is arguably becoming a crowded market, but there are still gaps and opportunities for institutions such as the British Army to make a difference in the success of UN peacekeeping. What we have recognised in our defence forces and what we have received Irish government support for is to address a gap that we have at providing bespoke and meaningful training at the strategic to operational levels of peacekeeping operations. So UNSI, our UN training school, for reasons of size and capacity, focuses on the operational to tactical levels of peacekeeping. But we have begun planning to develop a new school, an Institute for Peace Support and Training, which, according to our white paper for defence, will have an international standing and will facilitate the training of senior military and police peacekeepers, filling strategic appointments across missions nationwide. So that's another option for the British Army to consider. So I'll leave it there. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate in this conference and hope I've made some interesting points, and I look forward to our forthcoming discussion. Thank you.